In today's episode, we're joined by David Norton. From his years as a head teacher to his current role as chairman of the Burnham Community Centre, David has dedicated his life to education, community and connection. He shares why volunteering matters, how community centres bring people together, and the importance of building sustainable initiatives for the future. Along the way, David reflects on retirement, health challenges, and the joy of embracing new adventures, showing us the true value of community and shared experience.
Hi, I'm Dave, and you're listening to A Conversation with Angie and Mike, a podcast from Somewhere House, Somerset. Each episode, we meet people with inspiring stories, from local community groups to fascinating organisations, and explore how mental health has shaped their journeys. Somewhere House, Somerset is a small charity supporting people across Sedgemoor with counselling, group sessions, and community activities. To find out more or get involved, visit our website or email info@somewherehousesomerset.org. Let's get in today's conversation.
Good morning, David.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Would you like to introduce yourself to everybody?
My name's David Norton, and I guess I'm here because I'm the chairman at Burnham Community Centre.
Fantastic.
Well, also because you've probably got a world of knowledge that we'd like to hear about and your life experience, which is always what we want to hear about as well. It's quite nice.
Oh my goodness me, I didn't know it was going to be hours long.
It can be as long as you want it to be.
So how long have you been the chair of the community?
Well, when I moved into Burnham about 4 years ago, my wife was a member of the U3A, which uses the community centre a lot. And I wandered down to some sort of social event, a bit supportive role, you know. And the then chair of the community centre came and chatted to me and said, would I like to go out for a cup of tea and a cake at the local cafe, which I did, and had a nice cup of tea and a cake. When I came away, I was slightly bemused because it appeared to me that I'd become the treasurer of the community centre. And I never actually, if I'm honest, said that I would, but it seemed to be a fate that had already been cast. So I became, surprisingly, the treasurer, but very sadly, a week or so, the secretary I was going to be secretary, but then within a week, the treasurer passed away. So I was immediately transferred from being the secretary to being the treasurer. And as my arithmetic and maths is not particularly great, that was quite an interesting thing. So I became the treasurer and then sort of assistant to the chairman, and it all evolved from there. And then dear Ken, who would have been 91 this week, he sadly passed away in April. He stepped down from being chair about 18 months ago, and I sort of carried on his sort of job, really.
Yeah.
So I've sort of, by accident, I've found myself doing what I'm doing, really, if I'm honest.
And do you have have you done things like that before, or is it just this is new to you, this kind of stuff?
Well, I was a head teacher for 20 plus years, I guess. And so it's a bit similar to that. In my last head teacher role, I was there for 19 years in the beautiful town of Somerton and had a really great school, really happy job. But, you know, if you've done 2 or 3 harvest festivals, 2 or 3 carol services and 2 or 3 Easter services, you've sort of got the hang of it. So to do 19 of them, my sort of concentration level slightly dropped. And I then became much more interested in projects. So I got involved in doing lots of things. The school was, if you like, very familiar. I knew it from all those years of experience. I knew the community, the parents, the children, sometimes the children of children I taught, you know, so it was a bit like that. And we then just drifted from adventure to adventure and crazy thing to crazy thing. And so the community centre is really filling that void since I retired, if I'm honest.
Which is great, really. And I think that's what volunteering's about, isn't it? It's about doing that.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
A lot of people retire and don't always plan what they're going to do in their retirement and don't always realise that they're actually going to miss their job or parts of their job.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I retired on the 1st of December 2017, and I knew I was going to finish that year because that was the year I was 60. And I gave my notice in at the beginning of end of April that year, and happily then went through the months before I sort of finished. The problem I found I had was that I knew what I was doing up to the 1st of December, but I had no idea what I was going to do on the 1st of January and the subsequent days after that. My wife, she was still working part-time, and so she would leave me the proverbial list of jobs to do. And I found really that if I had a job that I was given on Wednesday, it didn't really matter if I didn't do it to Thursday, or maybe Thursday next week, or Thursday the week after that. So it became rather sort of overwhelming to have suddenly nothing to do. And in her profound wisdom, I think she still thinks it was wisdom, she thought we would get ourselves a dog, because we'd never had a dog when we worked, because we didn't think that was particularly fair. So seeing that I was almost sort of doing the Blackadder thing of sitting on the sofa with my underpants on my head and a couple of pencils up my nose to pass the time, she said, we'll get ourselves a dog. And so I said, well, what would you like? And she said, oh, I quite like those, what are they called? Old English sheepdogs. The wonders of the internet, went on the internet, found some puppies available over in Pembroke. We'll go and have a look. We'll go and have a look at one, So wandered over, had a look, and then the following week picked him up. So that was great. So we ended up, first time I've kept a dog, made the terrible teacher error. Most teachers survive by reading the books about what they're doing. I had no idea what to do with a puppy. I'd never read a book. And so that was quite an interesting experience. But so we've now got a 7.5-year-old Old English sheepdog that thinks it's a human. So it's fine.
Lovely.
And did that resolve the sitting with your underpants on your head type thing?
I think it did. It gave me something to be interested in, and I think that's the important thing, because, a head teacher's job is not the easiest job in the world. And you're always thinking about things, learning things every day. Yeah. And so being very active mentally. And I think that sort of, if you suddenly have a quick retirement, you are going to find it quite tricky if you haven't worked out how you're going to occupy yourself. Many years ago, I was very fortunate to meet a vice admiral who had retired in our little village here in Somerset. And he'd been, I think, the chief engineer of the Navy at one point. The year before he retired, he told me that his driver, because he was so important, he had his own car and a driver, spent a year driving him around doing carpentry courses and bricklaying courses. And they gave their chief executives a year's worth of being given other hobbies to do.
Wow.
Because they realized that once these high-flying officers, if you like, retired, a lot of them just went fut, because they couldn't cope with not being in that environment where they had stuff to do. So he was a great person at mending anything and building anything. And he had lots of different stories to tell of his adventures, but it was really good. So I think that's my advice now. I've say to my sort of teacher colleagues, if you come to retire, always have a plan the day after and know what you're going to do, and don't just sit there wondering for something to come along,
And saying that, people go, oh, I'm so busy in my retirement. But I think they're the people that had the hobbies beforehand, that had the time to have the hobbies beforehand and keep them going whilst they're working. And then when they stop work, they can enhance those hobbies by giving it more time. But when you don't have the time to do that, you're stuck.
Yeah, you are. And it is, I do find myself saying, I'm busier now than I ever was when I went to work. But it's a different sort of busy. Yeah. I said to my wife the other day, she said, would you go back and do a teaching job? And I said, well, no, not now. She said, but you almost work just as hard. And I said, but I don't really, because when I did the teaching job, it was to earn money to pay my mortgage. It was because I had to work, and now I have the pleasure, if I don't really enjoy something, I can walk away because I'm not have that commitment to it. And you need something to do, definitely, and keep active best you can, I suppose.
And I think for me, I've always had horses. So I've had horses most of my adult, grown up time. And that is my get out of bed reason sometimes. Because I think mentally it does alter things when you go from different transitioning into another stage of your life. And a lot of people don't always come out unscathed. They can come out very depressed or low or lonely or fed up or whatever words you want to use.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I suppose for myself, I mean, everybody keeps saying, when are you going to retire? Well, I don't think I'll ever retire. I love what I do.
I think you'll just edit what you do.
Exactly.
You know, fits your own sort of well-being, I guess, and what you want to do, because there's something rewarding, I guess, in doing things that provide services for people. And this is what I think the community centre has filled, is I'm able to see how that as a system operates efficiently, but also what its worth is within the community. And the dear chairman who passed away, he said it's not just a building that rent rooms. He had lots of Kenisms, phrases that he kept coming back to. That was one of them. We're not just a building that rents rooms. And what he meant was that the building has a community purpose, and it's finding those roles within it. And that's where we bumped into each other, really, because it was the sort of work that you did to support us that we now reciprocate in supporting you, because it was a sort of another of his favourite words was symbiotic. But it certainly is that. It's where everybody gains from the relationships that they have.
And I think that's really important, particularly when you're like, I remember when we opened the rehab, that a lot of the community were really quite concerned about opening the rehab in the town. And then, but there was other people that said, no, it'll be fine. Angie's worked in the community for a long time. And I think that's that bit about recognizing the value of a community. And it doesn't just come through, say, the community centre. It comes through those people that go to the community centre, those people that give to things in the community, and it then does join together. It is very symbiotic. It very much becomes a whole rather than fragmented in that sense.
Yeah, and I think you've got to have, I suppose, a sort of Christopher Columbus mentality, which is to have adventures in life. You know, if Christopher Columbus had sat there on the dock and thought, you know, it might be a bit dangerous, this sailing off across that big ocean, I think I'll stay at home today, and didn't venture off. And I think sometimes you get people who don't do things because of what might happen in a negative way instead of what might happen in a positive way. And, you know, that sort of thing of nothing ventured, nothing gained is certainly true. I think you have to have a vision to think, if you have a good idea, to try and say, well, I think I'll see if I can get this to work. Not, oh, well, I can't do that because this won't work or that won't work. Well, give it a go. You know, if you don't try, you will never succeed, really. And I think it's having that sort of creativity, that sort of sense of orientation and adventure that sort of works, you know.
It's taking risks, though, isn't it? And that's the other thing.
Oh, yes.
I mean, it's like when we started the podcast because it was somebody suggested, why don't you do a podcast? And we said, what for? Then, well, A, it will let people know about the charity, which is what we do it for. B, it gives people a voice to communicate their story or whatever the circumstance, or promote something or whatever.
Their ideas, whatever it is. Yeah.
And it's quite good for our relationship because we do a lot of, we're both trustees of the charity, but we do an awful lot of stuff that together as like friends, don't we? So I think that, you know, I think it just brings us together in a different way. And I like that. I really enjoy that. But it was a responsibility. We recognise that once we started, you can't just say, well, we're not doing it anymore. We've spent all this money on getting all of this equipment, that actually take the risk and do it. And we've done it and we really enjoy it. I love it.
Yeah, we've got friends that live in America, and they had a very sad event happen in their life. They had four boys, a set of twins amongst them. And one of the twins, when he was young, became very ill and passed away with leukemia. And when we met our friend after that, and she came over to England to visit her sister, she was very difficult to sort of understand her because she would wear this great big pin badge on her clothes with a picture of him, and it never went away. So it was quite something to keep watching this person who was obviously very grieving for something that had happened. And this is an interesting story, so pardon me if it goes on a little bit. So in America, they belonged to the local churches. The churches provide all the sort of community services. So if you've got your child wants to do football or basketball or baseball, all the clubs are run by the churches. And so they have like a coach or a trainer for 10 weeks or 12 weeks, and then they move up the groups. And so at the end of the cycle, when they moved up the age groups, they had a whip round to buy the coach a present. And to cheer her up, she was the soccer mum or whatever it would be, to have the whip round to buy the coach a present. A bit like teachers have their gifts at the end of term. And so she was still a bit bereft and not quite knowing what was going on. So she sort of said to the coach, look, I've got $25, not a lot of money, but you've had a whip round to buy you a present. So what would you like? And the coach said, if you buy me another mug, I'll kill you, because I have cupboards full of mugs. I have cupboards full of pens. Really, I don't need any more gifts. So our friend said, well, I'll, if you don't mind, can I keep the money and I'll give you a present and I'll put the money to charity? And the coach said, that's a great idea. And out of that chance, an idea formed in her head. So she formed her own little charity, which was, strange name, Coaches Curing Kids Cancer, childhood cancers. Yeah. And I think back to it, how's this happened? It just happened at that particular moment when she had the one idea and she went through it, and the idea has gone amazingly well. So it is like that, how things grow, and people have the belief they have some form of passion. Her passion was, I guess, to build a lasting memorial for her son and to try and avoid people having a similar experience. And that's what she's done. And the results of which are amazing. We saw her a summer ago, not this summer, the previous summer, and she showed us a photograph. And she said, oh, look, do you know who this is? She showed us the photograph, and I looked at it, and I thought, isn't that Elvis Presley's wife that was? And she said, yeah, that's right. How have you bumped into her? She said, oh, well, we met at, they have an auction that sells things for them. And Priscilla Presley was there, and they were selling 2 of the seats from Elvis Presley's plane, which had been found in the desert. A chap had bought it and was going to turn it into an Airbnb. So these Elvis's red velour seats were being sold. And at the same auction, some of Gronier's sponsors were selling a car for charity. This car's been sold multiple times. People sell it, pay the money, and then they give it back to be sold the next time. Anyway, so she was there, and at the same auction, they were selling the 2 velour seats for Priscilla's charity. And it went very well. And at the end, she said, I'll give 30 minutes of my time for a cup of coffee for someone who wants to talk to me. And one of Gronier's benefactors bought the time, and she ended up having coffee with Priscilla Presley. And they sat down and chatted. And she says now, well, I've got her mobile number. We text each other sort of a couple of times a month. And I thought, how can anyone have Priscilla Presley's number and exchange text messages? It doesn't seem quite real, does it? But I guess, it's how the sort of journey of life takes you,
And I think that's it, isn't it? Everybody's journey is different. And that's a phenomenal response to such a small idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's probably saved lots of young people's lives.
Yeah.
And kind of the charity was founded on the back of that, really, is to hope that we help people change their lives and have a different outcome. And it has. I mean, we link to about 100 people a week, and we have a substantial amount of support out in the community. But, you're constantly raising money, constantly doing stuff just like you are for the community centre, I'm sure.
Yes, I mean, I think what you also have is, I have particularly, is a desire to make sure there's a sustainability for it, and that the community centre develops and changes and evolves through time. I learnt this from my school experience, that if you get a school which suddenly thinks it's successful and it's doing things really well and it's been graded outstanding in Ofsted terms, what they almost immediately do is build a wall around themselves and say, we're outstanding and this is our way of doing things. And as soon as you do that, you cut yourself off and become isolated. And it's only a matter of time, because everything else will move on. You will stay doing it your way because that's a successful way. But your successful way won't have any great time of life, really. And you work better working in collaboration with others and pinching their good ideas and seeing what they're doing that you could do better. And so it's the same. I want to sort of see that the community centre develops for its future years. And one thing we're trying to do is to lower the average age group of the people who use it. At the moment, it's greatly used by particularly U3A, people who are retired, that sort of age group. And we're gradually sort of bringing other groups back in, because we need to lower that so it has a purpose for the community, because without a purpose, it won't exist.
How do you manage with funding and stuff?
A lot of good luck, I think is the word. We apply for funds for particular things. So we've had great success in applying for grants. So we've had grants from the Hinkley Point Foundation. We've had grants from lotteries, National Lottery Funds for All. So those were two significant grants that enabled us to improve our heating over the last couple of years. Last year, my heating bill in the community centre was around about £14,000.
Wow.
Which came as a bit of a shock after all the increases in prices. And then I discovered that for some bizarre reason, the heating system was on in the winter 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, because it was just on. There was no thermostat and no off. And I couldn't work out why that had happened. And all the thermostats on the radiators had been disabled over time, because you know what radiators are like. You come in, it's a particularly hot day. Oh, blimey, turn that radiator down, turn it down, you go home, it gets frosty that night, you walk in the next morning, blimey, it's cold, and you're never getting the temperature that you want. And so they got all disabled, so they were on full blast. So you could go down on a Sunday afternoon and see the smoke coming out of the boiler, as they knew that the whole building, and there are, I think, probably 10 rooms that we've got, plus 2 suites of rooms in the building. So it's a big building. It was incredibly inefficient. So we've amended that. We've tried to become more environmentally friendly. So we've moved a little bit away from reliance on gas. And we now have some infrared heaters in there as well. And we also, with our funding, got the solar panel system. So, hopefully that will reduce our costs and move us forward in another direction, really.
Sounds really good. So how much time per week do you spend volunteering for the community centre?
Now, you're really trying to get me into trouble, aren't you now? Yeah. Well, I try to limit it, because you do have to have a life as well.
Of course.
So I'm usually there on a Tuesday morning and a Thursday morning, and then odd times in between. But we try and sort of make sure we get a few days that are our own time, my wife and I, for our sort of retirement and to do our own things. But it would be very easy, if you weren't careful, for it to assume everything. The previous chairman, he was there every morning, and really I couldn't do that and stay fit and well, really, if I did that way.
No, that makes sense. So yeah. What other things do you do, outside of that? What do you go off and do with your wife?
Wrestle with the dog, mainly, and take the dog for a walk and
nice.
Do those sorts of things. We have grandchildren around as well, so lots of family time. Some of our family live in Weston-super-Mare, so it's nice to see them. One of my stepdaughter and her family, they live in Mauritius.
Oh, wow.
So we have the odd holiday over to Mauritius and sit on this tropical island and, enjoy life looking at that, really. So we do have, make sure we have our holidays. We, by complete error and mistake, we now find ourselves going on cruises, which was something I never ever thought I would do. But we've subsequently got into doing that by accident. So that's works quite well.
Yeah, where have you been? What sort of places?
Well, see, now that's how it evolves, really, because if you look upon it as a bus trip to start with, and you were going to go to interesting places, I suppose in England you'd go to London, you might go to York, you might go further up to Liverpool. That would be your coach journey. So what you do find is you want to look at the route where your little ship is going and figure if they're interesting places to go. And we went, before all of the problems with Russia, we went up into the Baltic and had a trip to St. Petersburg, and that was stunningly interesting going around there. And I quite liked it because on the journey, every day you were in a different country en route. And it was like collecting stamps. You know, I've been to a different country. I've been here now. I've been to Lithuania. You know, I've been here, whatever. So that was quite nice. We've then been around the Mediterranean a few times, and we've got places that we like there. We went up to the fjords. I did find that once you'd seen one waterfall and one fjord, they were really very similar to the next one that you saw. So 2 weeks looking at waterfalls and fjords was, you know, a little bit sort of not as interesting. But as times evolve, what you can find yourself now is on a wonderful ship with the most beautiful, luxurious, beautiful ship with wonderful food, wonderful amenities. And it doesn't really matter where you end up during the day, you know, because you go back to this floating palace, basically. So we've done a few of those around. Trip to the West Indies was fun as well. But what I was surprised over there was that no island's the same. Because I thought, you know, going to the West Indies, they'll all be a little similar to each other. But they were all different in their characters. So that was good, but I couldn't tell you which ones we went to. I think that was probably something to do with the rum punch. But anyway, it was quite good trips.
Have you ever thought of going on a cruise?
Bizarrely, I've been contemplating the idea of doing a Norwegian cruise recently. Going to the fjords, looking at doing I think they call it like the postal boat that you go on.
To Girton.
That's the one, yeah. Is that the one that you did? Or
no?
But that's the one I've been looking at, and it looks really good. Just not sure if I'd get cabin fever after about 24 hours being on a boat.
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of, well, we're turning into a cruise assessment talk this now. I think it depends what you want. I mean, if you want to go to the places and you want a little bit of adventure, you go on one of those boats because you'll have a bit of that. And it'll remind you somewhat of your ferry journeys across to France occasionally.
Yes.
Because it's a little bit like that. But if you go on some of the sort of bigger ships of the cruise lines, what you're ending up with is being treated like a 5-star hotel. And you'll have someone who makes your beds and cleans your room every day. You can eat any hour of anything you potentially would like to eat, which is not sometimes a good thing. You'll have your satellite TV and the films in your cabin. You'll have cinemas to go to. You'll see amazing shows. And, you know, it's it's like a proper floating 5-star hotel. And it depends what you're after, whether it's the sort of luxury of a holiday or an adventure.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah.
I can't go on a boat. I get seasick in the bath, so there's absolutely no point me even thinking about it.
That's, again, it depends which boat and where you go. And I think sort of we've only ever had it rough once. The rest of the time you wouldn't really notice the bigger ships. I mean, I thought, first of all, I'm never going to go on a big ship. 5,000 passengers? You've got to be joking. You know, I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm never going to like this. But we've been on boats that size and you have no perception that there's so many people on it.
Really?
Because there's so much space. You can always find space to be quiet and do the things you want to do. You're not in a herd, if you like, except when you see them all getting off the boat, entering some port somewhere, you know. It's a little bit like the ants marching across the jungle, you know. But to know it, we enjoy that. That's our sort of pleasure now. And it's got... I'm struggling at the moment because I need to have a hip replaced, so I'm not exactly mobile too much. So the living the luxury on the ship is just as good as wandering around somewhere, I think.
Why do you have to have your hip replaced?
It's worn out. Basically, it's worn out. I've had a couple of interesting adventures in the last few months that I've been waiting for about, I suppose it's about 3 or 4 years for my hip to be sorted out. And in January, I had the meeting with the consultant who said, I think we can fit you in now. Next 3 months, we'll do your hip. All right, excellent. And I'd had this funny thing before Christmas, and they said, you've got to have a CT scan. So I said, meant to have this CT scan. Get that first, and then we'll book you in for your pre-op. Okay, that's great. That's fine. So I went to the CT scan. I didn't have any problems that I had when they wanted the scan to be taken. Thought nothing of it. Nobody said anything. I walked in, had the scan, walked out, and they said, well, if there's anything wrong, we'd have kept you here, but you're okay. So I went out, went home. And just before I went for my pre-op, I had a phone call. And they said, we'd like to do another test on you, if that's okay, because we looked at the CT scan and we'd like to do an angiogram on you. Okay, right. So I said to my pre-op people, I've got to have this. We better wait and see what that says. And the lady who gets the sort of pre-op for that was a phone call. And the nurse rang me up and said, well, we're going to do this, Basically what we do, is we cut your wrist. All right, okay. And then we sort of put this thing in you and then we inject some dye in to see what's going on in your heart. All right, okay. So she went through all of this, what to do and everything. And then she said, well, and if there's any sort of issue, this should take about 30 minutes to do this. But we might, want to do some sort of preventative things. And if that's the case, it will take about an hour or so, Oh, okay, fair enough. So I went down to have this done and I'm not very brave, very scaredy cat really, with sort of anything that has pain to do with me. I'm not really interested. So I sort of went in and had this done. And then they came back and said, well, we're going to keep you in tonight. We don't mind, do you? I thought, well, that's probably just, it's getting late in the afternoon, save me going home. So I wandered.
You're so laid back.
So I wandered up to, was wheeled up to the cardiac ward. And another consultant appeared and he said, we've got you sorted out. You've heard about the slight mishap, have you? No, I've not heard about any mishaps. He said, well, when we were putting in the second stent, we sort of popped your artery slightly. Right.
Is that a mishap?
Right. Sure, and he said, we used the stent to sort of seal it up. So we thought we'd just keep you in, make sure everything's all right. Okay. That's fine. He said, but we were going to put 3 in, so you'll have to come back again and have the next one done in about a couple of weeks, okay? So I spent the night in hospital. Interesting experiences always being in. Some of the poor people there had been there 6 weeks waiting to go to Bristol because they were going to have, more treatment than I'd had. Just went home and then 3 weeks later came back for the next one, which was incredibly amusing and funny and entertaining as these things are. It was, truthfully, you're smiling now, but it was. This was a funny experience because I sort of meandered down. Again, I wasn't over looking forward to it. I arrived an hour and a half early for my appointment because my wife was going off to do another appointment. I didn't mind. I'd watched one of the films on Netflix on my phone. I was quite happy. So I got into the main cardiac area waiting room, and my bottom sort of hit the chair, and I was just finding my Apple AirPods out of my bag, and this nurse appeared and said, David Norton? Yes, you can come straight through to the lab. So I walked up, went into the lab. Now the lab's set up in bays, so there's 5 one side, 5 the other, most magnificent reclining chairs you can imagine. It can take you from a chair to being completely flat if you want. It's like what the astronauts on the Apollo missions would sit in, And I sort of sat in my chair and I was descended upon by 3 or 4 nurses. So there's one nurse sticking a thing in my arm. There's another nurse taking my blood pressure. There's somebody trying to pull my T-shirt off. And there's somebody asking me questions. And it's like I'm in the middle of a rugby scrum. And then they said, we've got a show. So instead of this afternoon, we're going to get you in now. Okay, right. This is exciting. So off this came. And before I had to take my shoes and my shorts off and all these things. No, we just take your T-shirt off. You'll be fine, And the consultant appears and he says, we've had this patient not arrive. He said, so I've got an hour before lunch. So I thought we'd whip you in now, make this afternoon a bit of an easier job. He said, so what have you come in for? So I said, oh, I've come in for a stent. Okay, yes, have you had any before? I said, well, I had like 2 of them about 3 weeks ago. I'll go off and read your notes, but hang on, we'll be back in a minute. All systems go. And off he disappeared, and I'm there, getting prepped. And about 5 minutes later, he comes back and says, change your plan. The patient's arrived, and it's an inpatient from Yeovil Hospital, and inpatients top trumps elective patients, so they go first. And so we'll be getting her in. Don't worry, have a cup of tea and a sandwich. We'll do you this afternoon. And off he went. So I'm thinking, oh, that was exciting. So I've all sort of...
That's not the word I would use, exciting.
So I've chilled and relaxed now. I've had a decaffeinated cup of tea arrives, because you can't drink caffeine when you're having this done. It arrives. So I've had a couple of sips of my cup of tea when the consultant comes back again. He said, change your plan. Change your plan. He said, the patient is latex intolerant. So we're going to have to strip the lab and blow if we're going to do that before dinner. So we're going to get you in now. Come on. And so I was sort of put my cup of tea down, and off we went.
Tolerant.
Off we went into the lab. And I think previously I'd had someone on work experience do it. This time I had the consultant, and he was very entertaining and funny. He didn't feel anything amiss. And, within sort of 45, 50 minutes, I'm back out again. And he came back and he said, well, I thought I'd do a proper job, so I've put 2 in, not just 1, okay? And that was it. And then in a few hours went home. So that was quite an event, really.
And which has delayed the hip?
Which has delayed the hip, because you have to stay a year on the anticoagulants for the stents. That's a bit more of a gruesome detail, that stents can clog, and they do that, you just fall over and people are very sad. So you have to be a bit careful about that. So although they called me back to another pre-op just the other week, and I went saying, surely we're not going to. And in the end, they agreed they'd leave it till next May before I have that done. But that consultant also, I thought, cracked me up slightly, because I told him that I wasn't very brave, and would he make sure he knocks me out okay? Yeah. He says, we don't knock you out. I said, sorry. So we do it in a local anaesthetic. I thought he was taking a mick. I thought he's joking, obviously.
So I was going to say, it must be.
Yeah. You're joking. No. You'll walk in the morning, we'll do your hip, and you'll walk out in the afternoon. We don't knock you out. It's done by a spinal block, epidural. So I thought, you will give me a lot of sedatives, won't you? Because I can't cope with that. Yeah. We'll put you on a pair of headphones, you'll be fine. And I thought, crikey. And that's what they do now. It's in and out, in the same day. Hip replacement. So
that's amazing, isn't it?
But I'm not looking forward to that. I can tell you that for true.
It's the joys of getting old. You get lonely, you miss your job. At the other
and things stop working.
It is something to look forward to, I suppose. It's different.
Definitely.
Is your wife fit and healthy?
Well, we've had a bit of an interesting time, because a few weeks ago she was doing a bit of washing up in the kitchen, and she stood on the cat. The cat's fine. Don't worry about the cat, please.
I wasn't, don't worry.
The cat was fine. But in trying to leap off the cat, she managed to throw herself into the worktop opposite, and it transpired that she fractured between 6 and 9 ribs.
Oh, Christ.
Oh, my gosh. She's in so much pain.
She had so much pain for about 6 weeks. It was horrendous.
Oh, it's awful. Breaking a rib is horrible.
So she did that. So we had 3 weekends when we were in A&E at Western Hospital for each. We had our own seat. So we were 3 weekends in a row. We could sit in the same chair. It felt like we were part of the family,
Put your name on it.
We did. One day we went in at sort of 6 o'clock in the evening and got home at 4. It was surprising.
Nice day out.
It was surprisingly light at 4 o'clock in the morning. And don't those birds make an awful lot of noise? It was quite amazing.
Why did it take so long?
Well, down there, they're dependent on what comes in, in regards to the ambulances. And it's just how it was. The first time we went, they, at just about after 12, they said to people, look, if you're not dying, basically, it's best go home and come back tomorrow, because we've had like 5 ambulances of people who need resuscitation come in. So we're not going to get round to you. We will, but it might not be till 8 o'clock next morning. So you're better off. So the first night we went home then went back the next day. and stuck it out until we did get seen.
Was that to make sure that it was broken ribs?
Well, initially they thought she might have cracked one, and then they went back and then she had a proper X-ray or a scan of some sort, and they decided that probably there were between 6 and 9 of them were fractured. So it's no wonder she was in a bit of pain and so uncomfortable with it. Moving around was so difficult.
It is.
So there was me lobbing around with my stents and her lobbing around with her broken ribs. So we were a good pair for a few weeks, really.
So let's get back to the community centre just briefly. I'm just thinking about it. Is there anything that the community centre need from the community?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think the main thing we have is a lot of the community don't know it's there.
Yeah.
We have many people who come into the community centre who have no idea what this big building in the car park by the swimming pool does. We've now put up a very nice sign. When you're passing by, you'll have to look at our new sign. So hopefully that will cure that. And we are, travelling on our adventures, if you like, to see what the community can now do. So we joined up with Somewhere House at the beginning of the year when we were doing community meals. And you very kindly sent some of your volunteers down to help be our sort of waiting staff. And that was a fantastic help to us do that. And for those 12 weeks, we averaged 50 meals every Sunday. So, and that particularly went out to people who were isolated and on their own or lonely. Sunday's a bad day if everybody else has gone to visit their children or whatever, and you're on your own with not much to do except waiting for songs of praise to come on. It was a very worthwhile thing to do, and we learnt about how the community centre could do these sorts of services. We've had a very interesting development in the last few weeks. That about 5 weeks ago, on a Thursday when I'm there, this chap wandered in, and he said, I'm looking to see if I could hire a room here, And I said, yeah, we've got plenty of rooms. He said, what's you doing? He said, well, I used to be the chief GP in Somerset, the main GP. Yeah. But now I work directly for the NHS. And we've got this project we want to try. He said, basically, at the moment, people are having a hard job getting to see GPs. Tell me about it, I thought, really. He said, because that's one GP sees one patient. So what if one GP could see 12 patients at a time? And I thought, how's that going to work? Because if I've got something like a very bad toe, I don't want everybody to know about having a very bad toe, do I? It's a private thing.
Is it?
It depends on what you're wearing on your feet to let people know that you've got.
And if you've washed your feet.
Yeah, very true.
So I thought, this is an odd thing. He said, because we now have the systems where we can bring a group of people who are all suffering with the same ailments or conditions together. So our aim is to set up a clinic in a community, and we'll invite people to come along who all share the same thing. We'll all have a group session. There'll be a GP, a nurse, a pharmacist, a physio, if that's needed, and any of the other health professionals. And we'll have a morning session, and then an afternoon session, and sort of immerse those people. But what we think will also happen is somebody will say, well, for my bad toe, I've taken paracetamol. And others will say, well, no, I use ibuprofen. No, I spray this on it. So you'll get people who will share their experiences. Yeah. I don't know why I've picked on bad toe, But anyway, you see what I mean.
Because he's got a bad toe at the moment.
Because they would share the experiences. And that way the group will be strong. And I sat there thinking, this will never work. Oh, yeah, that's good. We'll book in a room for you. So he booked in for a first room for a trial, and he's booked another one. And the 2 trials that he's done, he claims have been very successful ones. And they've had the number of people turn up that they wanted. And now he thinks that that's something they're going to be doing twice a month and invite people to come along. And he said, do you know that in the NHS, all the money that's spent in the NHS, only 20% of it goes to patient-facing services, because the rest goes on these expensive buildings, expensive machinery, and all the wages. That's where the majority goes. So this is a very economic way of working. So we get a huge amount of funding to help support these projects. He said, now, if you did one of your community meals and you invited people to come in for a Sunday lunch, we could possibly develop a thing where we could give you grant funding to do that. And everyone who came in as an extra bonus after they'd had their pudding, we'd give them their flu jab. Right, that's quite a neat idea. I don't know if that's what you get for a pudding nowadays, but it seemed to work.
But
so
it comes back to what you originally said, isn't it? It's that sharing of knowledge and sharing of that space. It's originated many, many years ago. And one of the phrases that have gone, you only keep what you have by giving it away. If you share your knowledge, it will remind you of your knowledge, but it will also give that knowledge to somebody else, and then they can share it with somebody else. And AA works on donations. It doesn't get funding. Nobody gives it any money. And it has been existing all over the world for years. So why can't we do that in our own community?
True. And I think there's so we have now sort of groups that are doing that and providing services. Well, our model railway club that's in the centre has grown from strength to strength. I mean, 12 months ago, it looked like, there was not many of them wandering around. But now when they have their club sessions, they've got a good full group of people that are there. And, they say that's working very well. So it's just growing, having that facilities and people using those facilities creatively.
I'm just aware of time.
Right.
And I'm just thinking, how would people make contact with the community centre? What's the best way for them to make contact with the community centre?
Well, as I said, we don't man the centre as an office, but one of the delights of technology is if they ring the centre number, when I'm not there, it's diverted to my mobile phone. And as long as the dog doesn't want to talk on the mobile phone, which he normally wants to, and say hello, we get a lot of calls that come through for that. We have our website, or we've got our email address, and people do that in the way to make the first contact. What we try and do is we always meet the people who want to use the community centre, really, to give that bit of personal contact. I know some centres just operate completely online. You book it, you turn up, you put the code back in, and off you go, and you don't see anyone. Well, the community centre is part of a family. It supports this group of people, and you want to know which family are using it in what way, and whether we're providing the services they want. So, it's that way it works. It's a personal contact. It's very important.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it's a really good idea.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been really interesting. Some great stories.
I think you need to come back.
I think you need to come back and tell us more stories.
I could tell you plenty of stories about life as a head teacher.
We'd love to hear them.
We'd love that. We'd love that. That would be great.
People that listen would love that as well. So yeah, we'll book another day. That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. I am a professional talker, I'm afraid. That was my job. Being a head teacher, all you do is talk.
Yeah, of course you do.